Cynthia Chin-Lee is my neighbor, and I'm delighted that she's here again today. She is a publications manager at Oracle. She is also the published author of several children's books, and she spoke to us about one of those, Operation Marriage, last year. Today she is here because she is involved with the Mountain View Cohousing Community. Cohousing is an old concept, and it's also a new concept and has been written up in local media recently. She has a panel of people that she will introduce for you. Let's welcome Cynthia and the people who are with her.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back. My name is Cynthia Chin-Lee, and I'm here on home territory because my daughter went to Palo Alto High School, and she's now a successful college grad and working in Silicon Valley. So I'm going to make a shameless plug. I was here last year talking about my book, Operation Marriage, which is a children's book with the perspective of marriage equality from a child's perspective. And I am going to have a signing at Books Inc. in Palo Alto Town and Country Village on Wednesday, this Wednesday, May 22nd at 7 p.m. So if you're at all interested in that book or any of my other children's books, I brought them and there's flyers. So I very much appreciate your support. We're going to have the world debut of a mini play of Operation Marriage, but I don't want to set your expectations too high because it's going to be performed by 4th and 5th graders from Maloney Elementary. So, cohousing, a new kind of neighborhood. I'm an associate member of Mountain View Community Cohousing, and I guess I'll first start with the definition of cohousing, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll have the introductions of the panelists, and then each panelist will talk for 5 to 7 minutes, and I have some prepared questions, and then you can ask questions as well. So I thank PatZy Boomer for bringing this poster, What is Cohousing? It's a form of intentional community with complete individually owned private dwelling units, but shared activities and facilities. And it's a supportive neighborhood with a strong community feeling. It's different from a commune or a co-op because you get to own your own place. And there's financial autonomy, so you're not pooling your money. You're still in your individual home. And it's different from an ordinary condominium because the community members set the design goals and they get to decide their own needs and preferences in the design of their community. So it's nice to have an architect here because you'll learn about some of the architectural aspects of co-housing. And there's going to be some shared work and responsibilities. And I will say that one of our panelists, Emily Rosen, is from a co-householding community called Green Wave in Palo Alto. So that's slightly different from co-housing, but many similarities. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We have Raines Cohen here, PatZy Boomer, Emily Rosen, and Lee Erman. So I'm going to read some long bios, and then I'll let Raines take it away. So who is Raines? Well, I do know that he was one of the early programmers on the Apple platform, and he's from the Boston area. But now he is a community organizer, co-founding and running Cohousing California, which is a network of regional umbrella groups with 2,100 members in East Bay cohousing alone. So he came from Berkeley this morning. For the past decade, he and his wife and business partner, Betsy Morris, have lived at Berkeley Cohousing. He was an initial member, developer, and homeowner of Swan's Market Cohousing, which is in downtown Oakland. He served on the National Nonprofit Cohousing Association and Fellowship for Intentional Community Boards, and the Bay Area Community Land Trust. He's now on the Co-Householding National Advisory Board, helping people find shared living solutions. Raines works as a co-housing coach. He has visited over 100 established co-housing neighborhoods. That's really impressive. And advised many. He's the associate producer of the shared living documentary called Within Reach, and the author of the Aging and Community chapter in the book Audacious Aging. And he's also a certified senior advisor, so congratulations, that's new, as of last week. Our next panelist is PatZy Boomer, and she is from Mountain View Cohousing Community. PatZy grew up in Palo Alto, next door to her husband Dirk. And she claims she is a Palo Alto High School alum, even though she never went here. But you can ask her about that. She has 3 daughters, 2 grandchildren, and 1 on the way, and the holy terror of a Pomeranian named Bugs. They've enjoyed living in Mountain View for 15 years. She has her BA in human biology from Stanford down the road, and her career path has been anything but a straight line. Following graduation from Stanford, she spent 5 years working in restaurants and national parks all over the U.S. After that, she went into marketing for restaurants with Spectrum Foods of San Francisco and was later business manager of the Lark Creek Inn in Marin. She is a certified foodie. She was then done with restaurants forever and embarked on a career in commercial interior design and space planning. 17 years later, which is a year and a half ago, she decided it was time to repot herself and started taking classes in gerontology at Foothill College. She's not sure what she's going to do with her interests, but she doesn't want to retire to golf, which she doesn't play and doesn't find appealing. She loves to travel and hits the road as often as she can. She adores lakes, rivers, and mountains and has camped every summer for the last 20 years at her Sanity Place, McCall, Idaho. And I think her friend is from Idaho today. She joined MVCC in mid-2010, and she finally remembers the camaraderie and sense of community from her days of working in the national parks. So that's one of the reasons she looks forward to co-housing. She finds the suburbs to be a less than welcoming environment where neighbors are seldom seen and few interesting walking destinations. Her personal interest in co-housing also stems from watching her mother slow slide into Alzheimer's after she stopped driving. So she believes it's very important to stay socially engaged, physically active. So rather than moving to any of the local retirement communities where a faraway corporate entity makes all the decisions, she's looking forward to being engaged on a grassroots level with people she respects and knows well. Our next panelist is going to be Emily Rosen. I know her personally because she's my massage therapist. She's currently a member of the Green Wave community in East Palo Alto. Green Wave is a small, diverse group of 15 adults and kids who live on an acre of land. Emily has a background of living in small town communities, including in Sonoma County and in Washington State. She's also lived in several intentional communities, including the Ananda community in Nevada City. College training in liberal arts has been more of a personal interest. She has worked as an apprentice carpenter, a cook, a manager of 2 small restaurants, a stint as an overall dairy hand, and several other bucolic endeavors. I didn't know that about you, Emily. She has had a private body therapy practice in Palo Alto for 20 years, and that's how I know her. Her choices have leaned toward hands-on, self-employed, personally involving, low-key lifestyle. She has a great appreciation for natural beauty and wild places. She likes living simply and has ample experiences of living off the grid. Her next pursuit will be learning to build cob and earth and landscape and garden structures. Living in community has been a natural choice for her for mutual support, fun, and resource sharing. Community has also allowed Emily the freedom to indulge her hermit tendencies. Interesting, a good balance for her. Our last panelist will be Lee Daniel Erman from Mountain View Community Cohousing. Although born and raised in Chicago, Lee has spent most of his adult life in California. He also is from Stanford with a PhD in computer science, and he worked in computer science, academia, and industrial research from 1970 to 2000. In 1992, his career shifted to bodywork and massage therapy, so we have 2 massage therapists next to each other. Lee's interests include how compassionate touch can enhance the health of the individual and society, and the use of technology to promote human interactions and environmental issues and climate change. He and his wife Esther have been together since 1994. They have 2 adult sons. Lee has 2 adult sons from a previous marriage and 2 grandchildren in England from Esther. Lee and Esther joined MVCC in 2009 and have been heavily involved in its intense and extensive development process, including the designing the physical entity, working with legal issues, and growing the membership. MVCC recently broke ground and won't be finished until mid-2014. Lee's co-housing vision includes a supportive, caring, and vital community, a kind of self-created, highly functional, and extended family. Hopefully these will be active and healthy years, but the community will be there even if we hit bumps along the road. Lee wants MVCC to be a living experiment in intentional community, exploring a number of directions. One of these is how a community can live very lightly on the earth and simultaneously thrive. And I know last week the Humanist community had a speaker about living lightly on the earth. Is that right?
Probably.
Yeah, okay. I remember seeing that anyway on the website. Another direction is using technology to enhance the human aspects of community. So I'm going to now turn it over to Raines Cohen from Berkeley Cohousing to talk about cohousing.
Thank you. Are we on? We're not quite on. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I've been enjoyed a number of humanist events in the Oakland area, so it's great to see the strong community here as well, in a beautiful spot. As she mentioned, I've visited quite a few communities, and I've lived at Berkeley Cohousing for the past decade, and then Swans Market Cohousing in Oakland before that. So I'll try to provide a little opening perspective about the state of the movement and maybe debunk a few myths about it, common misconceptions, and give you a little context for how it comes together. You could think of cohousing as being the first post-feminist form of neighborhood design. Coming out of Denmark, people were saying, okay, we're raising kids, but we don't want to have to do it on our own. We don't want to have to, drive, into our separate homes and spend a lot of time making arrangements. What if we have recreate the village model where there's shared space and people can watch out for one another, and maybe some more, what would be individual domestic tasks get shared. Like, if you're cooking meals together as a community a few times a week, then that means less time that one member of the household most often is spending time individually preparing meals and watching the kids. This is, I think, as I understand it, how it evolved in Denmark, and architects McCammon and Durrett, we have their books here, brought the concept to the U.S. from seeing, okay, what is it about these places that makes them different? Why is it that people are actually out and connecting and filling the space between the homes, not going into their separate spaces and so isolated? And as it's been recreated here, it's also evolved to meet the needs of boomers who've reinvented every other institution as they've come along and saying, hell no, we won't go to the nursing home. Let's find another way. Let's, how can we help take care of each other and have the right degree of privacy and community? I think, anybody else here had experience? Oh, sure. Okay. That's a little easier, a little boomier. Anybody else here had experience in living in commune or co-ops or dorm group housing and so on? And I don't know if people are have nightmares of that or had learning experiences, I guess, as we say, from that. But I think we've certainly learned in the co-housing movement and say, okay, let's set the dial over to just the right spot between privacy and community. It's like, let's have our own kitchens, but let's do meals together a few times a week. Let's have our own homes, but a shared space. So we can live in a very small space. My wife and I are in the smallest smallest home at Berkeley Cohousing, 660 square feet with a lot of books. Fortunately, there's overlap in our libraries. But we can have the guest room in the common house. When we want to host a gathering, we can have 50 people over without even cleaning house, because we have the use of the shared space. But more importantly than anything else, we have the community of my neighbors who range from 2 years old, celebrating a birthday just next weekend, to 84 now. My 5-year-old neighbor helps me mow the lawn, and he actually does help really make a difference and gets me to use the push mower instead of the electric. And my 84-year-old neighbor, well, actually 2 years ago, did a road trip to LA with us. We taught her how to use the GPS. She got to visit her daughter in the desert, and we all saved on the cost of the trip. And I certainly get a lot of inspiration and connection from my neighbors. We find that, that the co-housing movement, certainly you'll find a lot of humanists there and people that are willing to take a bigger picture, to look and say, okay, I'm not so certain about things. I'm open to hearing what other people feel, and and learning from each other. Also, Unitarians, Buddhists, Quakers, Jews, maybe people with a high tolerance for meetings, or just a willingness to be wrong, or a willingness to engage and connect, and be open to learning from our neighbors. Some people are surprised to learn that you actually find a lot of introverts in co-housing. And because, hey, this is a social forum, people are really choosing this. But no, it's, if you're an introvert, like I am, believe it or not, you actually, if you move into a place that makes it really easy to bump into people, then you'll get that level of interaction with people, but still have the choice. Go into your home, close your blinds. Sure, we have a physical design that makes it really easy to see each other. The parking's pushed to the edge from our retrofit site in Berkeley, and creating a green in the middle, a place to run around. So we're running into each other. We have the sight lines. The homes are close enough. We can talk to each other from our porches and have the cooking together and the learning from each other that way, and the eating together, and the degree of connection with one another, that degree of caring. But more than anything else, it's the aspect of community. Co-housing has been called the most expensive personal growth workshop you'll ever take, because you learn so much in the process about yourself from the process of dealing with others and using consensus process, which does not mean unanimity, does not mean, okay, my way or the highway, you've got a full veto power, but rather, okay, let's hear if you have something to bring that you're telling us that something's wrong with what we're planning here. Let's figure it out. Let's learn from each other and find ways to move forward and tap the collective wisdom of the group. And that's where I believe the greatest potential is, to help us all be learning from one another, coming to a greater understanding, coming to a greater perception of ourselves and the world around us. And even though people say, okay, there's no guru, there's no wife swapping, there's no shared income. It's it's about the community. The values are about being good neighbors, and we find that communities tend to start green and get greener, both in their design, but in how we operate and how we support each other and living in community, way more than green building standards do. But I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions and hearing what some of the other panelists have to share about the particularities of local visions of co-housing, the neighborhood model, and co-householding, the shared extended compound, family community model.
Great. Thank you. So next we'll have PatZy Boomer from Mountain View Community Cohousing. And Raines said something that maybe PatZy can comment on. So Berkeley Cohousing is a retrofit cohousing, meaning there was existing houses and they retrofit the houses together to form a community. And Mountain View Community Cohousing is brand new. So maybe PatZy can also mention that in her remarks. So welcome, PatZy. You stand up, please.
Yeah, it's interesting how many different forms of co-housing there are. There are the little cottages. Point it that way, okay. The little cottages, there's another one in the East Bay where they've just bought a series of houses on the same block and taken down the fences in between, and the amount of land that opens up is amazing. And you see just kids going crazy on this land, and it's all perfectly private with people watching over sort of each other's, a lot of eyes on the street sort of thing. I got a real taste for community living in college, and then my 5 years of extended college almost, working in the national parks, so we all lived together, worked together, played together, and it was such a wonderful personal experience with some wonderful people. And now I reflect on my 15 years in my house in Mountain View, where I sort of know that, I know the first names of most of the neighbors, but there's no sense of community at all. You drive into your garage, you go and you close the door, and that's the last you're seen from the street. Every so often, once a week, maybe we get to wave at one of the neighbors, but that's it. And then I watched my mom in Sea Ranch stop driving, and 8 miles from town, very quickly just plummeted physically, emotionally, mentally, the works. And I've been studying gerontology, and there's some really interesting research on once people stop driving, 15% fewer trips to the doctor, 56% fewer trips out to restaurants and shops, and 65% fewer visits to visit family and friends. I mean, this is the time when you've got all the time to spend with your friends, and then you can't get there. You're isolated in your own home. And I look at my neighborhood, well, there are sidewalks on part of it, but there are no street trees, so you die of heat exhaustion half the way to anywhere. It's probably about a mile round trip to the bus stop, 3 miles round trip to the grocery store. How do you function in these sprawling suburban communities when you don't drive? It's and I'm looking at moms and looking at my neighborhood and thinking there's really got to be a better way. And so Chuck Durrett some years ago had just put out the book Senior Cohousing, and I pulled the article out of the newspaper and thought, that looks cool. And about 6 months later, I found the article again and got on the Mountain View site and thought, that looks really cool, because it answered a lot of the things that's in my neighborhood. I love Mountain View. It's lively, and we are walking distance from downtown, and the farmers market and the performing arts, and it just seemed like I'd be into this at any age, because I like living with other people, and I'm learning an amazing amount about working in groups. And as Raines talked about the consensus, you get such better decisions because you have so many more people working on it. And there are some people in our community that sometimes seem like a real pain in the ass, but they're also often the ones that have a different vision of things. And if you can incorporate their vision into what you're doing, you end up with something that's just so much stronger and better and works for everybody. So it's one of the nice things about consensus is, rather than democracy in which the majority wins and the minority loses, with consensus everybody wins. And it takes a little longer, but it's a really enriching experience. So I've really enjoyed being part of this, and I cannot wait to move in about a year and then actually really find out what it's like. So that's it.
Our next panelist is Emily Rosen, and she's from Green Wave Community in East Palo Alto. And she has a slide presentation. Do you want to speak first or show your slides first?
Well, I'll show the slides really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. And I'm going to stand back here just because
Yeah,
I can see
it's
things.
fine.
So I thought I would. Is this on?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
point it
Okay.
toward your mouth.
Oh, okay.
This much directly.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is my broken arm. Anyway, this is my my new grandnephew. This is who you've been staring at for all this time. Let me see if I can quickly get this up. Otherwise, I'll just be off the cuff and forget the thing. Let me see. So one of the founders put this together for a recent presentation of another panel discussion that was presented over at the Avenida Senior Center, and I'm hoping I can do this. So this will show you a little bit about what Green Wave looks like. Let me see. I press that, and here we go. No, we're good. I'm not going to be reading this, but you can look at what she had to say. Yeah, I guess that's it. Okay. So basically, it's a whole other model, and I really believe in this as a model for a very practical model for what we can do as a society for people who don't have all the money to invest in. It takes a bit of money to invest in a co-housing project. You can read what Diana has said. She's actually amazing because it's a real testimony that she still would do this again. And, it's been since, I think they started this Green Wave project in 1992. And this is a kind of a site map. Hard to see what it is, so I'll just keep going here. Okay, there's 15 of us. Youngest is just less than a year old, and probably the oldest is about 75 or so. And we share things and all the chores that go with maintaining the property. It's an acre of ground. I'm just going through these really quickly because I want to be done with the thing. I like this one. She says, this is how the founders' hopes turned out. Yeah, think about that. After all this time, they can still say that. Our 3 agreements are to come to our weekly meeting, do our share of the work, and to bring up any dissension, things that really bother us. We agree before we move in that we're going to bring them up and not just fester about them. Okay. A few more things here. This is an acre of land that just had one house on it originally. This is about the simplicity angle. We really do try to share things, and we're not exemplary in our, what do you call it, recycling and all that. Sometimes people aren't really that into it, and it's not one of the rules, so, but mostly pretty good. This one share thing, I'm not sure what she meant, but I'm just going to keep going. That communication thing is, and now Diana has a real background. She's the one that set this up in nonviolent communication, and that's one of her real goals, and I think it has been helpful for all of us. Okay. So this is a little bit of green wave here, you can see. And that's the end of that. How much time do I have? Maybe about 2 minutes here?
Why don't you come out and speak?
Okay. Let me grab my glasses. So I've a lot of experience with communal living, and some of it I wouldn't want to repeat. But thank you. That's perfect. You know, over my lifetime, I have lived by myself a lot. I've been in a relationship. I've been married. But this is the way I wish our whole. I think it would be something for even as a business proposition for people to think about recreating this type of thing. Now, I didn't ask our owners how much profit they have made over the years from this, and I'm sure it took a while before they even saw any profit. Most of the people who live where I live are renters, and as far as that goes, we all have our consensus form for who moves in. We really do an extensive search for the right person, and we interview and we really grill them. Anyway, but so far, I have to say I've been there 4 years, and so, I've seen a lot of people. Most people that have been there as long as me and more, but it's just a real harmonious group. And I think recently, for example, we really help each other out a lot. So I had a broken arm. People just came to were so helpful. I can't even tell you, and it just was really sweet, Anyway, that's about all I have to say. And I'm glad I got to speak for this other kind of form of co-housing, which is a little bit more informal, and there's just so many different types of ways to make life more of a community experience, and I'm really happy I found this one. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Lee Daniel Erman, and he is from Mountain View Community Cohousing.
Hi, it's good to be here. Let's see, maybe I'll touch on a few things, but related to community.
That's all. Other one. Turn it on. We have this one back. And that make it easier to hold too.
Oh, hello. Yes. I'm going to touch on, I think, centered around community and consensus. And maybe I'll talk about some of the particulars of it to make it a little more concrete. We have an architect here. One of the interesting things, okay, let me back up a little bit. So we've not moved in yet. My wife and I have been involved for 3.5 years now, since October of 2009. When we started, we were like the 5th household in the community. We now have 15 out of 19. So we have not been living together, but we are a community. in spite of the fact that we're spread out across Mountain View and Palo Alto and Portola Valley. But we are a community because we've been going through the process of planning and designing and building what we want to live in. Not just the physical aspects, but also how we're going to operate. So we've had, we meet almost every 2 weeks for a business meeting that runs about 3 hours. And we have fun days, and we have workshops and other things. And using the consensus process has been totally amazing to me. Even in my former career in computer science, I worked on teams, and I loved working on teams. But this consensus process is a different kind of an animal, especially if we're talking about a larger group of people, and we're talking about long-term things where we're really committing to living together. So to be concrete, for example, was designing the physical plant. We have an acre, and we, what do we build there, starting from scratch? Well, we had Chuck Durrett, who's built about 50 of these, designed and built about 50 of them, but it wasn't a process of him coming in and saying, okay, here's what we should do. He led us through workshops where we said, okay, what are our values? We're going to start with that. What kind of activities do we want? So we get more precise. How much do we want to do them? And then we said, okay, here are the 80 different facilities we could think of having on the site, and now we want to say, okay, we can't have all of these things, so let's start matching them. Do we want to do, if we had to make a choice between having a hot tub and having an exercise room, which do we want? And so we now prioritized all of these things, and we said, okay, we can go up to this far. So that was part of the process, but more fundamentally, it was a matter of us getting to know each other, getting to know ourselves, what the important things were. So often we come, you have a group having to make a decision on how do we do something. And everybody kind of has an idea. I think we should do it this way. Someone else should, I think we should do it that way. And then you start arguing with each other or maybe voting. Well, in the consensus process, at least the way we've been using it, in which we've been trying to model the way others have done it, you step back and you say, what are your concerns? Rather than, I think we should do it this way, what's behind that? What are your concerns? What are your values that are driving those concerns? And very often we find that, as we clarify that for ourselves, two things that happen. One is you understand where the other person is coming from, but also you kind of understand where you're coming from, and you decide, well, it becomes clear, oh, I thought we had to do it this way, but really my concern is such and such, so that gives me a wider set of options for how to do it. And this can happen in terms of just policies. How do we want to handle pets? How do we want to handle smoking? Or how do we want to handle how we actually go about designing this? So Chuck had designed about 50 of these, but we worked with him, and we would come up, and there are a lot of constraints when you're designing something like this. You've got zoning laws, you've got codes, you've got the physical constraints, and then you have your desires. So for instance, we did not want to have cars on our property. So we ended up with an underground garage, but that puts all sorts of constraints on what you do. One of the fascinating things was that working together, and none of our members were architects or had very much experience in terms of doing this thing, but we often, by chewing things over and understanding where we were coming from, someone would come up with an idea that Chuck would never have thought of, and we ended up with a better design than any one person could do, even a very experienced architect. And we find that happens not just for that kind of a problem, but also for other kinds of things as they come up in the community. If we really back up and saying, what are we concerned about? Give it some time, and the process takes longer, so that people can think, can express, can understand, and can chew things over. And that's been really an amazing process. Is it always fun? No. Sometimes, as someone said, a pain in the ass, and meetings can take a long time, and sometimes things can get a little warm, shall we say. But underlying it all is a commitment to being in the community and a commitment to the process of working things out. And that is, to me, a fundamental aspect about this, is that you're committed to the community and working things out. So I think that to me, and so the whole consensus process and is kind of amazing, and I hope one of my goals for our community will be that we will be an example to other communities and to the society as a whole of saying, okay, we can come from with different ideas and different concerns, but in a both rational and caring way, come to some decisions about how we can live together. Now, certainly it's easier for a group of 15 households to do it than, you know, a few 100 million people, but I think a lot of the same kinds of ideas can hopefully scale up. And so what I would like is us to be an example, a living example for others as well. There are many, many aspects we could talk about, but I think maybe that's enough for now, and we'll throw it open to questions. And our co-housing community is probably by a factor of 3 the most expensive that's ever been built in the world, and probably by a factor of 2 or 3 the units are larger. And that's based on kind of 3 things. One is we wanted it to be in a fabulous urban location in one of the most expensive places in the world to live. So we're walking distance of downtown Mountain View, Castro Street, the Performing Arts Center, the library, the transportation. The zoning laws said we could only have 19 units on the property. And as I mentioned, we wanted to have an underground parking, which is very expensive, just digging that hole and reinforcing it all. So when you take all, and most of the people are coming from, you know, they're living in houses that they bought in this area 15, 20, 30 years ago, and they're used to living in nice facilities. So because we could only build 19 units, and because of the inherent cost of the land and the project, in order to make it financially viable, we didn't have some sugar daddy and no one won the lottery, the units had to be large enough to justify the total price that they would have to be. So these are very expensive. Essentially our median unit is about $1 million. We have some smaller and some larger. So this is, and we go from about 1,350 square feet up to 2,000, which for co-housing is fantastically large. It's larger than most of us want, but it was kind of the exigencies of the requirements. We also have, of course, a lot of shared common facilities, and you can look at the information there, but we've got about 4,000 or 4,500 square feet of indoor shared space, as well as outdoor vegetable gardens and walkways and a meadow and so forth. So it's atypical from that point of view. We also made the decision early on that we were going to be adult-oriented. And that's been an area also of some discussion within the group. And again, there are a lot of details, and we can go into discussion on that if people are interested.
You're taking questions now?
I wanted to highlight that there's a table with information about Mountain View Cohousing and cohousing in general. One of the books that is available is Creating Cohousing, which is by Catherine McCammon and Charles Durrett, and those are the architects that have done many cohousing communities. And this has a lot of profiles of cohousing communities, as well as an introduction to the history of cohousing. Several people have mentioned Denmark, and that is the country where the cohousing concept was first systematized. All right, so I guess we have time now for questions.
Can I just add one thing as well?
Sure.
That this is being videoed, so if anybody wants to refer to it, it'll be on our website in a couple of weeks, along with most of the other history of our presentations.
I see another question over here.
Okay, so I got the mic. I'll bring it round. If you could just put your hands up, people with questions.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 3 so far. Okay.
On the way back to
4, 5.
Excuse me, I actually have 2 questions. The first question is, I used to work at Stevenson House in Palo Alto. It's a HUD subsidized housing unit, and it was actually for seniors. low-income seniors. And one of the things that I thought was rather remarkable about it was the interaction that the tenants had with each other. And I think that part of the reason was that the units were very small. They were either studios or small one-bedroom units. And so it wasn't actually particularly delightful to spend your days and nights in this tiny little unit with a tiny little kitchenette. So people tended to sit around in the hallway and in the lounge and talk and have lunch in the cafeteria and so on. And so there was a lot of looking after each other. And this is directed at you. It's my first question, because I'm thinking that if people have this luxurious space of 1,400 to more than 2,000 square feet, they might tend to hole up. That's my first question. And then the second question is, what if somebody moves out? What if they don't like it? What if somebody moves in that doesn't meet your standards?
Okay, thank you for those two very good questions. For the first one, the goal, as has been mentioned, and Raines especially talked about it, is one of the major goals of co-housing is to provide a balance between private space and community space. And again, here we took advantage of Chuck Durrett, who's designed many of these co-housing communities and lived in a number. And so the design of it is explicitly done to foster interaction, to foster the possibility and the likelihood of interaction. So, for example, all of the kitchens and the kitchen sinks are in front of a window in front of the common area, the community area, the walkways. So the front doors, the kitchen sinks, and kitchen windows are all there. So you'll see as people go by, you'll see each other. There is a little nook in front of each home that is in the walkway that's set back so that you can have a table and a couple of chairs there for informal interactions. The mailboxes are all in the common house, so you park your car in the garage or you walk from the street. And to get your mail, you have to go into the common house where you're likely to bump into someone. The common house has a media room, a lounge, a crafts room, a shared laundry, even though you can also have laundry facilities in your own house. And of course, there's the kitchen and the multi-purpose room. And there's a workshop, and all of these are intended to say, oh, these are nice places to be. And so yes, you have your nice home, and you can do your private entertaining there. You can hole up. My wife is a writer. She's going to want to be able to go into the back room and just be by herself. But at the same time, you can go out and mingle as much as you'd like, and it's physically set up to enhance the chance of running into somebody. So I hope that answers the first question. Okay, this is the question about people moving out and moving in. Well,
yeah, maybe Raines wants to answer.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that, Raines?
Yeah.
Sure. It's a big part is the intention. Co-housing is primarily a self-selecting process, as opposed to Green Wave, where people are so close together and sharing so many facilities. You really want to have a very, very close look, and try even trial periods. Some communities do. Other ways, co-housing, you're qualifying for the mortgage, so you're sort of being screened in that way, or able to afford it by whatever means. But it's a self-selecting process. When I sold my place at Swan's Market in Oakland, where I used to live, I spent a while in the process. I would have a lot of prospects over to a meal or a meeting, and I'd sit at the next table and keep an eye on them and be available for feedback from neighbors. But it was really ultimately up to me who I sold to. And it is a condo legally. The owner can choose who to sell or rent to. Some communities do have rights of first refusal or other ways to help out in the process. But so much is about the intent. Why would somebody want to move there who didn't want to be in community? They're just, it's not a place to get away with anything. There's so much scrutiny in the design, the physical design, and the social design. You get that?
Maybe add a couple of things to that. For one thing, some market surveys have been done, and co-housing, usually the price usually has anywhere from a 10 to 20% premium over the equivalent non-co-housing facility. Part of it is because you have a lot more common facilities. You don't just have this clubhouse and a pool maybe, but we have very extensive common facilities. So people are not going to want to move in unless they want to be in co-housing. And historically, I think for most, and Raines can probably speak to this a lot more authoritatively, but my understanding is historically, there's usually waiting lists of people who want to move in. And so you generally, very often, you don't even stick these out on the MLS services. There are people who are familiar with that housing community and want to move in, and it's usually then a matter of then picking and working out who's going to come in. So does that always have to happen? No. I'm sure there are times when some weird thing happens. I did remember we visited one co-housing community where there were some rental units, and some non-resident owner rented it to someone, didn't even tell them that this was a co-housing community. Okay, these things can happen.
Do we have another question?
And I'll just mention real briefly that at Berkeley Co-housing, it's so stable. Our last resale was 10 years ago. Nobody wants to leave. And so that's great. We don't bother with the waiting list. They're having renters and housemates and so on. But it also means that we haven't exercised that muscle of our outreach and connection in our list and community. So,
This question is for you, Cynthia. You're the associate member of the Mountain View Cohousing Community, but you live in a single-family house in my neighborhood. So I'm wondering what your interest is in this.
Sure. So Mountain View Community Co-housing isn't built yet, so I can't live there, but I'm an associate member, which means I'm sort of on the process of becoming a member. So there's a fee that you pay to be an associate member. You meet all the existing members. And I will also say this, I'm married, and so as many of you know, one person in the marriage may have a stronger interest than the other person, naturally. So I have a stronger interest right now. My husband, Peter, has less of an interest. So this is something we're going to negotiate among ourselves. Fortunately, we have some time since the community is not built yet. So thank you for asking the question. Next question.
Yes, hi. I should mention I live in a community here in Palo Alto called Magic. They've been running for 39 years, and I've been there about 2 years. When I showed up in Palo Alto, I was looking for a community, and they were about to build a house. I came to dinner, and I said, let me see your plans, and I looked at them, and I said, you could try this, and you could try this, and that was 2 years ago. The house is almost done, so that was a lucky match. My question, I have two questions. One is, we heard a little bit about the gold standard deluxe version, and I wondered if anybody had anything to say about what the other end of the spectrum might be, what might be affordable, most affordable way to do this, and what somebody might expect. The other question is, for my own personal interest, how a community might get put together around a particular interest, say, for example, an artistic community or musicians or something like that, some shared common pursuit, and what might be available or how successful that has been, or what your thoughts are on that.
You want to hit the second question?
I think Emily's going to answer the first question.
I'll try to. So it's a different model. We have mostly renters where I am, and it has worked great. And I think it's sort of that's the other end of the spectrum. And I think because of that, it takes someone who is an investor to have the vision. And I know a number of people who would love to see that happen more in this area. And it has happened, I think, in Sonoma County recently, where they're doing a tiny house. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be renting or if everyone's going to be owning. Okay. I think Raines would be an excellent resource for the spectrum, but I just know that this seems to work really well. And it's the only time I've ever lived in a communal arrangement where, well, no, I can't say that. There was another time when I actually found that a Catholic summer camp had been resold, and the owner went ahead and rented the cabins and all the buildings, and we ended up with a really nice musicians and artists community there. This was in the 70s near Russian River. Anyway, it was quite a different experience because we were all really young and not really that tuned into what might be our future, you know, like a real settled type of a way of life. Anyway, is that helpful? I don't, you know, I'm just coming from what I've seen with this particular example, and it really is a model, I think, for what could happen.
I'll just mention I got to visit Green Wave last month, and I was really was impressed with the community built there and people having a lot of choices in it and what they wouldn't otherwise have in terms of amount of space and people around and able to support one another at different points in life. At Berkeley Cohousing, we're a limited equity condo. The city had strict rent control, and to avoid having to pay large condo conversion fees for taking rental units off the market, we said, hey, we'd all qualify as moderate income, and so for 30 years our prices are capped. So the area market has done this, our prices have done this, which is handy because when the market did this, our prices still did this, and it's it kept it affordable. I know my wife and I wouldn't be able to be there otherwise. Even with help from our family and down payments and so on. But it also means that's part of the reason why nobody wants to leave. They can't afford to just sell and buy something else nearby. Comparably, it's, the market's gone up. But I think nationally, Eastern Village Cohousing near DC in Silver Spring, Maryland, the same project, retrofitting an old office building for the same units, won awards for luxury and affordable in the same building, the same construction, the same places, and green. And so it's the creativity of the community and the investment of the members is one piece of the puzzle that makes this possible. Members invest typically at least 10 to 30% of future home prices into the project, and that is they get a return back on that. It's treated like an early down payment, and that leads to affordability in other ways as well as the participation.
So just a time check, we've got just under a quarter of an hour. I've got 6 people lined up so far for questions, so just to keep that time in mind.
And we'll certainly be here afterwards for anything we don't get to here.
What you relate is a beautiful idea, and it's what do you do with the reality of someone who comes in with the idea of going along with the community, but later on, either mental illness or whatever, or just personality, alcoholism, whatever, drugs, when they start being a difficult member in the community, causing problems with other people, is there some way of, when you have to, can you get rid of them? Or can you control it? What have you set up to?
It's where we vote them off the island. Legally, we're a condominium, and they have the rights to peacefully occupy their house, so long as they're not creating a nuisance to others. If they are, we have rights which I've heard of at least one community that, like any other condo, they had to go to court and got a court order. You better sell your house. To somebody, to say, hey, this isn't working out. The reality is, yes, we have the legal structure, we have the underpinnings of condo law and our CC&Rs, and the same as anybody else. But because we're a community, because we're in relationship, we can nip a lot more of these things in the bud. We can recognize something's going on. We're seeing people more often, check in and help out and bring resources to bear. People will be people. People do change over time, but in one case, one of my neighbor who developed a depression and was yelling at some of us, and we had enough context to not take it personally and not say, oh, you're yelling at me, I'm going to yell at you, or I'm not going to talk to you, but instead, people had relationship, were able to check in with her family and say, hey, is she getting the help she needs? Is the resource available? And we know we have understandings that aren't like universal. We're going to do this for everybody in the community, but person to person. And if I know that if I can't talk to Jane, I can talk to Joe who can talk to Jane, and we can find things out. Plus, we do bring in mediators, conflict resolution training as a group, and tools like I'll show afterwards. I'll have a display a card deck of some of the tools we use in community that help with that. Do you have any experience at Green Wave of people having to be asked to leave that might be well?
So that's only happened twice. Okay. Well, and it's easier there because basically we have a consensus set up, but with that arrangement with a renting situation, it makes it a lot less of a legal issue.
PatZy or Lee,
What are your plans at Mountain View Community Co-housing with issues with people? Yeah, PatZy.
I think some of it is much like Raines said. The one we're looking at is what happens with Alzheimer's, and there are people with Alzheimer's in co-housing communities, and it's actually, they could probably stay in their own home for longer than they would be able to stay in a regular house in the burbs, because there are other people watching out for them, helping them, giving them rides to the wherever. But at some point, we're going to have next of kin, their kids' names, and there may be a phone call to their child, say your mom can no longer live here safely, and that'll be really sad, but it can well happen.
Also at Mountain View Co-housing, there is a caregivers unit, so they're planning that there may be a time when people get to a stage where they'll need more help, and there's a caregivers unit. So I'm not really sure exactly how they're going to charge for that, but it's there, and it's certainly for the future possibilities. And I think Martin or Ed's going to do the...
Yeah, I just had a quick question. You talked about the consensus, process for making decisions, and what I was curious about is what if after everybody describes all their feelings and values and what's really motivating them, and there's still a disagreement, as to whether the hot tub's better or the golf course is better or something, then at the end of this long consensus discussion, then do you finally still just take a vote to decide which side wins, or how do you handle that?
Well, Raines can probably talk about this too, but we've been, in terms of our both legal and operating procedures, there is a fallback to voting. However, the notion is, and I think this is pretty ubiquitous through co-housing, is that if you have to fall back to doing a vote, you failed, and you really don't want to do that. So that partly it's there just for legal considerations, because there has to be something. We've found that we've been at this now for 3.5 years. We've had lots of sticky things that at first blush and even at second and third blush seemed like they were intractable. And again, there's the notion of commitment to the community, that if it's something that we have to come to a decision about, then we work it through, we go back, we'll farm it out to a small group of people that represent the different views to work at it in a smaller group. Some things are really hard to deal with 15 people or 20 people in the room. We'll go back to first principles, say, okay, what are the values? And finally, it comes down to consensus doesn't mean, and I think Raines mentioned this, it doesn't mean that everybody loves the decision. It means, okay, I can live with it in the context that the vast majority or the most of the community feels like this is a good decision. I don't consider this to be a showstopper. Now, the only time, in consensus you can quote block, you can say no, I don't accept it. But that's very strictly understood to mean I believe this is harmful for the community and is almost an existential threat to the functioning of the community. But the likelihood of that, after you've gone through this process and everybody understands everyone's concerns, the likelihood of that seems pretty low. So if it's something that's not real important, well, fine, you say, okay, I can live with it. If it's something that's really important, then you work through it again and again until you can come up with something that works. It's not clean, but it's wonderfully satisfactory once you're finally done. And we've been through a few of those at MVCC, and I'm sure there'll be more. But each time you go through it, in some sense, it becomes easier because you begin to understand each other better, you begin to understand the process better, you begin to understand yourself better and understanding what's important.
Martin, you want to go? Okay.
My question relates to what it's like to join one of these communities at different stages. So Lee, you joined very early in the planning process. PatZy, I get the impression you joined a little later. Cynthia, my impression is you're at a further stage back. Raines, it sounds like you moved to Berkeley after it had already been created. So I think we have a really interesting mix or spectrum of kind of coming into the process. And Lee, I think you made some really interesting points about how the community forms before the building is started. And let me just say in background to my question, Deborah and I looked at MVCC, I don't know, 2 years ago or something like that, and thought, oh my God, that's expensive, and started to look, are there other opportunities? So we have looked at, does it make sense to sort of start earlier in the process? But now, frankly, what you are doing looks wonderfully attractive, and so I'm wondering, what would it be like to join this late in the process?
Well, this late in the process, you've missed all the what kitchen sinks are we going to use and all the frenzy of what faucets, what flooring, what all that. So a lot of the work has gone by. But we're now engaged in sort of a different, now that we're through with the major building things, we're now engaged in participation and what should our committees look like going forward and how are we going to do a meals program and how often are we going to do that. There's the whole sort of social and living together side that we're now working on. So it is a fair bit of work, but you come in at sort of a different phase of what the work is. I think if you come in much later, I sometimes am really jealous of people that join groups that are ongoing, because it's like, a lot of our decisions are really hard. It's hard work, and to come in when those are already made must be just really nice, but then you've also missed out on the community that's formed while you're making them. So, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Raines?
I saw a note in the Common House sometime after we moved in about at Berkeley Cohousing about the new system or somebody actually referencing the new people. I thought, oh, she must be talking about us. No, she was talking about the people that moved in 8 years before. It weren't part of the original core. And we're still, being that the last resale was 9.5 years ago and we moved in 10 years ago, we're the new kids on the block still. And it's been interesting because a lot of things weren't written down very well or recorded because, we all understand what this means. Or even if there's meeting minutes, what was the context? What were you talking about at the time? And so sometimes that means without anything else written down, people refer back to the legal documents, which I think is unfortunate, but it's, it's what's written down, it's a solid base. But it's interesting for us as the first people to buy in without already renting there. That was several before had done that. We got to hear about several different people saying authoritatively, this is the way things are, in ways that were conflicting. And so it was educational for us and for the community about the need of creating a process of on-ramp and documenting shared understandings and building the culture that supported that. And so it's still an ongoing process now. We have our community meeting this afternoon, and I was looking through some old minutes to say, okay, when she repainted the paint color on the side of the shed purple because it faces her window, it turns out we actually had made an agreement that she could use a different color, but nobody could remember that several years later. Even she couldn't remember it. It just that, she knew this was the right thing to do. And then I went back to that page and half of the lines didn't print out well, so I can't actually read it all necessarily. So it's an ongoing interpretation. I think as church groups do with the Bible, they find fresh meaning and context in the words every day.
Hi, Dana St. George. I had a quick comment. In the 80s, I facilitated a co-housing project in Los Gatos for a year. This was a HUD project, and the people were recruited from amongst elderly, widowed homeowners in Los Gatos. And there were 8 bedrooms upstairs, and downstairs was a common area. And it was a very interesting year for me. And we had weekly meetings, and it became, when the house first started, these people were at that time, it was like an experimental project, and they wanted to see how it would work. And so when we first started out, there were no rules, and we had to kind of create everything from scratch. And this was 8 elderly, low-income seniors who had previously owned their own homes in Los Gatos, so they were not indigent, and they had choices, okay? And so this was a very contentious process, and every week, every meeting was rife with, problems, and we ended up having to make rules about everything. There were 8 bedrooms upstairs and I think 6 bathrooms. And so we had to make rules about which towel rack, would be used by which resident. And then down in the kitchen, we had to divvy up areas in the kitchen where people keep their own utensils and so on. And we had to make rules for the kitchen, rules for the laundry, rules for the bathrooms, rules for what time people would come in and out. And then, and this was a very lively group of seniors.
Yes.
And then in the end, we discovered there were some people that were well suited to this kind of project and others which really did not fit. We had a woman who drank in her room and fell down the stairs and broke her arm. That was a problem, and so on. But it was very interesting, and by and large, most of the people really wanted to make it work, but there were definitely problems. But it was a good model because it was an old and beautiful, well-maintained house. It was not expensive. The 8 people moved in, and, there we go.
Yeah, that sounds like what we called co-householding now, that kind of shared community living in one house. And the closer you are together, the more you need clearer boundaries and deeper understandings and ways of supporting that connection, because it's less of a choice. You're going to be bumping into each other or waiting turns for the bathroom or whatever. So you need to work things to figure out more in advance.
I think Martin.
So I think lunch is ready. So the 3 more questions, I guess they can follow up with you afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.